Hey there, Autism Fitness founder Eric Chessen, leading the movement for movement and bringing you another edition of Autism Fitness Tuesday training. And in this edition, we're going to be talking about one of the biggest, I don't know, issues, things, considerations, whatever you want to call it. It's communication. So let's get going. But before we do, please definitely subscribe. And if this channel is helping you, it might help other people, professionals, and families in your circle. Share it with them, and you'll get every edition of Autism Fitness Tuesday training when you subscribe. You'll know first before anybody else on your block. Anyway, talking about communication. So we need to start off the conversation by discussing the fact that the autism and neurodivergent population is, of course, as we know, a spectrum. And that means we're going to get a wide array of both productive communication and also receptive skills, how our life skill athletes process information as well. And these capabilities are going to determine how we're going to interact with our athletes. But above all else, we have to know our athletes as individuals. What are their personalities like? What are their interests? What are the things that they like to talk about or discuss? What are the things that they don't like to talk about or discuss? Knowing the individual is priority, and then we can build our communication around the strategies that work best for them. And I'm going to talk about a few of those, but I didn't want to start off by so narrowly defining how we're going to communicate with our athletes, because we're going to communicate how they best receive communication. And that goes everything from how we are coaching the athlete to also how much communication, how much language we're using, to also conversations as well. We know that some of our athletes are very conversational, other athletes less so. Some athletes like being spoken to often. Others do really well with relative silence throughout the program. And these are things that, of course, we may have an inclination about in the first 1 or 2 or 3 sessions, but it's really going to take a couple weeks. I would say, if I had to put it at a certain amount of sessions, somewhere between 6 and 8 sessions, we're going to get a good indication of how our athlete rolls through each particular session. And that's going to be crucial for the rapport that we're building with them as well. Because ultimately, if we're taking a wide view of this, what do we want for our autism and neurodivergent athletes? We want to create a comfortable, safe, and reinforcing environment for them, so that fitness becomes something that they enjoy and will pursue lifelong. And this is something that, when we have younger athletes, something that we want to keep in the back of our mind. How do we make this something that long term they want to be a part of and they want to engage in as well? And some athletes are going to take to it more than others. It's the reality that fitness is not necessarily going to be, oh no, I'm going to say it's not going to be every individual's favorite thing on the face of the planet, but we still want it to be part of their repertoire, part of their life practices. If we're putting fitness as a foundation of life skills, it needs to be in there. And even if we're categorizing it in terms of hygiene and physical well-being, well, being physically fit is both a proactive and a preventative measure as well. So let's talk about communication. Now, with respect to instructional, it is a central tenet of our autism fitness programming that our directions be concise. Right? Now, this doesn't mean our other communications are short and clipped and brusque, but it does mean that when we are explaining, and I'll get to that in a second, how to perform an exercise. So here's what we have in autism fitness. This is one of the big deals that we give you, especially in the certification. Hint: one of our practices is called label, demo, do, and cue. We label the exercise, we demonstrate it for the athlete. And then while they are doing it, we provide the cueing that is least intrusive and is most likely to lead to their independent success with that exercise. Of course, some athletes are going to need more cueing with some exercises, less cueing with other exercises. And we're going to have athletes who need a lot of cueing across the board, meaning their warm up and power and strength exercises. And we're going to have athletes who are much more independent with those exercises. And that doesn't necessarily line up with cognitive functioning either. Oftentimes those can be completely separate. So you can have an athlete who needs a lot more support, but is relatively independent with some of the exercises. You can have an athlete who is highly independent in other areas, but they need a lot of cueing to get that full range of motion, to get that motor control, all of these other important aspects of physical performance, right? So when we come back to label, demonstrate, do, and cue, which is a mantra and a practice in autism fitness, what it does is it segments and compartmentalizes the way that we are giving information to our athletes. And what it prevents is the dreaded overcoaching, giving an athlete too much information, especially on the front end of that exercise. Here's an example. So if we are teaching Clyde how to do a push throw, the over-explaining, the overcoaching way would be, hey, Clyde, you're going to do a push throw. So first pick up the ball, and then you're going to hold the ball at your chest, and then make sure that you are looking forward, and then take the ball and push it towards me and let go. And then I'm going to throw it back to you. Way too much information. And by the way, this isn't just for the autism and neurodivergent population. This is for any population. We don't want to get into the habit of explaining how to do the exercise when it is much more efficient, takes less time, and much more effective to label it. We say, hey, Claude, let's do some push throws. And we then demonstrate. So we've gone from labeling the exercise. Consider how little time that took, the label. Push throws. Here's how you do it. That's the demonstration. So I go from giving the exercise a name so we can reference it later and in the future, and going into demonstrating it. So now I'm demonstrating it for the athlete. Clyde, here's a push throw. I push throw to Clyde, or I push throw next to him so that he can see the push throw. And then I say, your turn. Here you go. Here's the ball. You do it. And then when Clyde does that push throw and he's successful with it for the first time, great. Now I can take a couple steps back. He's doing the push throw independently. Awesome. If he struggles with it, then I can figure out where my cue needs to be to support Clyde in performing that push throw much better. But I have the baseline of his performance right now. And I've done that in a mere, I don't know, 10 seconds, 15 seconds at most, or I could still be standing there 30 seconds later explaining this push throw that nobody wants to hear about. So when we communicate about the exercise and about the performance of the exercise, less is much more effective and efficient than a whole explanation for any population, but our autism and neurodivergent populations in particular. So that's around the exercise itself. Now let's talk about conversation. If you are currently working with the autism and neurodivergent population, you may notice that oftentimes we have athletes who, or individuals who are going to communicate a lot during their session, regardless of what we're working on, if it's speech or academics or physical education, they like to talk. Great. So what we can do is start figuring out where are they talking a lot and what are they talking about and how can we build that into the session? How do we navigate that for the best outcome for that particular athlete? So I'll give an example. If we have, let's say Theodora. I've never had an athlete named Theodora, but it's a cool name to have. So we have Theodora, and Theodora loves to get onto the subject of, let's go with a classic here. Let's go with SpongeBob. So Theodora loves to talk about SpongeBob and the different episodes and likes to compare and contrast different seasons, right? Totally cool in between sets of squats. But while she's doing the squat, if she is starting to talk about season 2 versus season, I don't know, I think there have been 47 seasons now, I'm making that up, but something like that. She's comparing season 2 with season 28. Well, it might take her a little bit off track, so we have now less focus on the squat itself. So we don't want to completely derail that conversation because it's highly reinforcing for Theodora. So what we might do is say, I want to hear all about this. You've got 4 more squats, and then I would love to talk about this. So we want to set up a situation in which the athlete can be successful, and we are not just shutting down that conversation. I want to have that conversation because I want to know all about Theodora's comparison between season 2 and season 28 of SpongeBob, just not while she's squatting, because then her performance of that squat gets a little bit faulty. So what we want to do is make sure that the conversation is happening at an opportune and appropriate time during that session. So for some athletes who are talkers, we just want to get that talking segment into the right place at the right time for them, and we can help shape that behavior. I'm sure those of you out there who are working with general population have some athletes who do this same thing as well. So, of course, it's not just relegated to the autism and neurodivergent population. It's best practices in coaching across the board. So we never want to shut conversation down completely. We just want to give the athlete an avenue to do so successfully that doesn't detract from their performance of the exercise itself. Then we have our athletes who were working on getting more language. And this is one of the things that I love working on with other speech professionals in the field. Like, where can we get more language into the session, often getting sentences that are 3 or 4 or 5 words long. And this is something that we may not want to work into the set itself. So we may not want to ask an athlete, what are you doing right now while the athlete is doing a sandbell overhead press? Because we want them to be focused on the overhead press. But pre and post exercise, this is a great opportunity for incorporating some of those speech targets. So we can ask an athlete, what are you about to do? And if they say overhead presses, awesome. And if we want to build that into a complete sentence, what are you about to do? I'm going to do overhead presses. Even more awesomeness. Now we can do that on the front end of that exercise, or we can do it on the back end and ask the athlete, what exercise did you just do? So in this case, we're also working on short-term memory and recall. What exercises did you just do? And it might be 1 exercise, it might be 2 exercises as well. So the language contingency is going to come into play if you have an athlete who with whom you're trying to develop more language, and for athletes who have plenty of language, we just want it sectioned into the right place, right time during the session so that we're not taking away from their performance of the exercise. So that is the intro to communication during fitness or adapted PE programming for our autism and neurodivergent population, because we just don't want to pigeonhole it into they have too much language or they have too little language. It's where is language and where's communication going to be optimal, both in the instructional side and then on the rapport side, so that our athlete has the best possible experience with us and they go on the rest of their lives enjoying fitness in some capacity because they've had a positive experience with it. So I'd love to know how you incorporate communication, or what you'd like to know more about with respect to communication during fitness and adapted PE programs for your autism and neurodivergent life skill athletes. Put them in the comments below. And if there's something else that you want me to cover in a future edition of Autism Fitness Tuesday training, put that down in the comments below. And if you have other comments, put those in the comments below as well. And then, of course, if you're ready to become an Autism Fitness Certified Pro, well, that link is in the description below. You get your self-paced course and your full day hands-on, in-person or virtual practical, so that you get the training that you and your athletes deserve. I'm Autism Fitness founder Eric Chessen, leading the movement for movement. Thank you for watching. Again, please like, subscribe, and share these videos. And I will see you again next week with another edition of Tuesday Training.